Hey everybody, welcome to another entry in the Hyrule Compendium. Today we have a repeat commenter, McPorkchop54, asking which game has the best dungeons or what elements go into making a good dungeon.
Okay.
We got kind of this is a good broad question actually.
Okay, so we're talking dungeons. All right.
Yeah.
I think just because you're talking elemental, I think that almost eliminates anything, not completely, but pre-Ocarina. Because like Link's Awakening, the dungeons kind of blur. There's some thematic dungeons in there.
Oh yeah.
But they're like the separation or of style of dungeon is, I think, totally different.
Yeah.
Like, once you got to 3D in particular, once you got to Ocarina, not don't get me wrong, A Link to the Past had like the Skull Woods, which is very unique.
Mm-hmm.
It had, you know, the some water-based dungeons that were different, but I think like Ocarina of Time was the first game that really had, I think, really good thematic dungeons.
Oh yeah.
And they play totally different, especially the adult dungeons in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Fire Temple, you're surrounded by lava almost at all times, in most of the rooms at least. It totally changes the way you have to traverse.
Mm-hmm. And that with the water temple, you had the boots and
Completely underwater for a good portion of the dungeon.
yeah.
And then the Shadow Temple, there's invisible walls and secret platforms, and you need to hover. You know, so it's like the dungeons play totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time in the series where like that happened, I think, at least.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, that's probably one of my favorite games, dungeons. Although I think some of the more recent games have also done it very fantastically.
Yeah. What do you think makes for a good dungeon?
Well, one of the things, I'm a big fan of enemies.
Okay.
I like dungeons that have enemies that fit that dungeon, that are like thematic to that dungeon.
Okay.
So like some new enemies that like you haven't encountered before, and this is the first time you encounter them. Now that's a very minor thing, but that I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
I think having, this might sound weird, but like optional stuff to do in the dungeon
Yeah.
is always a plus.
Yeah,
Like,
I agree.
I don't like linearity of going from point A to point B and you're going through all the rooms. Like I think of, I'll use A Link to the Past as an example. I think Hyrule Castle, the tower, the second time through Hyrule Castle,
Yeah.
or even the second half of Ganon's Tower, it's literally just a gauntlet of room after room after room with no diversity, no, you know, and I don't like that at all.
I'm okay with it if that's like the one time they do it in a game, because that's kind of the theme of that dungeon is you're like racing to the top.
Right.
But some games it'll show up I think too many times.
Yeah.
And it's still not my favorite type of dungeon in that game for sure.
Right.
I agree with the optional thing. I like one where you have to, because it's supposed to be like a big puzzle. So I like where you have to go to different places. And I actually like in A Link to the Past, if you know what you're doing, in a lot of them, you can go right through it. But if not, you could get lost in certain ones.
Yeah.
Like the curve of difficulty is kind of, it's huge.
I mean, A Link to the Past in particular, more so than any game. Like, I think of Misery Mire. I don't know if you remember that dungeon, the Sixth Crystal.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can beat that dungeon without going into, like, 70% of the rooms.
Yeah.
Like, maybe not that many, but, like, a significant portion of the room. I remember talking to some friends, and they were just, like, casually playing through A Link to the Past, but they're big fans of the game. They're like, yeah, I haven't seen this room in 10 years.
Wow.
Because you just never go in this direction.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. What do you think about rooms, like, speaking of enemies, where you have to, the puzzle is you just have to kill all the enemies?
oh, it's okay on occasion, but, you know.
I was just playing through A Link to the Past, and there was, I don't know if there were rooms like, yeah, there are some rooms like that, but there are some, too, where you have to, like, kill a specific enemy for the key. I kind of like that, actually. But then I think it doesn't happen as much in like Ocarina of Time, but I'm thinking of one room in the Fire Temple specifically where you have to do that, and it it just didn't translate as well.
Okay.
As to where when it happened in A Link to the Past, like there was torches and other stuff in the room, and I'm like, what do I do to get to the next room? And then I killed someone. They dropped a key, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it was a trick in itself, as opposed to I walk into a room and the only thing is enemies. I'm like, okay, I got to kill all these guys.
Right. Yeah.
I hate when it's like so obvious.
Yeah. I think some one thing A Link to the Past does, Ocarina of Time does as well, and I think this kind of fell off in some of the later games. Maybe you can think of examples where it didn't, but where a lot of the dungeons were quite open, where you needed, say, 3 keys to beat the dungeon, whatever, and you can get them in any order, really. So you get like launched into an open world. I think of the Water Temple as one of them, where you can go in several different directions right from the start.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to raise and lower the water a little bit, but there's like 6, 7 rooms you have access to. Some of them are dead ends at the time, but I mean, you have to accomplish certain objectives, but the order of which you accomplish them, you just have to get them all done eventually. So it does create a little bit of like you have to remember where you've been, where you're going.
Yeah, you have to backtrack and stuff like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't totally call that backtracking, but yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily, but you have to, like you said, remember where you were. I think that doesn't happen as much in like Wind Waker or Twilight Princess.
With Twilight Princess in particular, I don't really remember a case where you could do things completely out of order, really. I remember most of those dungeons being, generally speaking, like you had to, they were kind of linear. Sometimes you revisit a lot of the central rooms, but generally speaking, they were, I think, quite linear.
Yeah, you'd revisit it and then go off on a different path.
Yeah, like I think of like Arbiter's Grounds. There's that first room with the 4 poes, and there's a lot of different doors, but you can only go one way. And you eventually come back into that room, and then you can go a different way, but that new route is not opened at first.
Yeah, whereas, yeah, that's true. Instead it's like a bunch of smaller puzzles,
right,
in the way, instead of like the Water Temple. It's like one big puzzle. Yeah, I really like that. Actually, I want to also give a shout out to I think the Majora's Mask dungeons do a really good job of being open like that too.
Yeah, I think so. There's so few dungeons in that game, and Woodfall is sort of very like traditional.
Yeah, but that's the first one.
Yeah,
but I think Snowhead is really good. That's one if you, even when I know where I'm going, because I've tried to memorize that, it's still like a bit like, oh, you go over here, and then it's, even when you've got the linear track of it in your mind, it's still not just straightforward, which is kind of nice. And then of course Stone Tower Temple is
right,
pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's a quirky one.
Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing mentioning, like, I think of the Skyward Sword dungeons as well. Yeah. And when you look at the maps of the dungeons, and you know how I love my maps, there's not that many rooms in a lot of the dungeons. Like take like the Lanayru mining facility, the 3rd dungeon. There's like 4 massive rooms, and there's like I think 3 other rooms. There's only like I think maybe like 7 rooms in the entire dungeon, but it's like a 45-minute dungeon, because a lot of these rooms are so big, and it's one of those things it's sort of like what I was getting at with Arbiter's Grounds in Twilight Princess, where you revisit the room, but in this case you're revisiting it from different sectors of the room. Yeah. And sometimes those, when you revisit it, they like interact with one another a little bit, because it's still kind of linear in that sense. But I guess it almost makes it appear like it isn't. Yeah. It's somewhere between the old school dungeons and Breath of the Wild. Yeah. Where that's like one. Yeah, I don't know. We talked in the other videos about the divine beasts, but
That's a whole different story, I'd say.
Yeah. I do think though the elemental. I like the elemental stuff. What do you think of the elemental stuff? Is it gotten too cliche at this point?
No. I think it's cool. I wouldn't just say elemental though. I like the themed dungeons, which I think even A Link to the Past sort of had, despite not having a lot of elemental. Like the hideout.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
Right,
Skullwoods is obviously cool. Like, I like that the places felt like what they were. Or, like the sand ship.
Okay.
Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I like...
It's one of my favorite dungeons ever, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that one's one of the most memorable ones in that game because the theme is so strong.
Yeah.
I would actually prefer that over just, this is the fire area,
right.
You know, to where they're like, this building exists for a reason other
right.
than to be the level of the game. you know
that brings a point. I know we were talking amongst the staff, and somebody referenced, we were talking about Twilight Princess dungeons, and somebody's like, "Oh yeah, the water dungeon." Oh, we're like, "Oh, you mean Lakebed Temple?" And it's, "Oh yeah, the fire temple." Oh. You mean Goron Mines? It's like they just maybe in the case of those particular dungeons, they're not as memorable for what they are. They just know about their elements only.
Yeah.
So they just associate it with the elements.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's other ones. Like nobody. I don't think people are calling the sand ship the desert temple.
No.
And like maybe to a lesser extent, I don't think people call the ancient cistern the water temple of Skyward Sword, you know what I mean?
No, yeah.
Because they're more, especially Ancient Cistern too. I think has a good theme. It sort of has the hybrid because you go to that. If you remember you go to that underground area with all like the cursed vocal blends and like it's like a hellish type area.
Yeah.
In the middle of the dungeon, which is
the theme isn't just water. There's
right.
some spiritual elements and stuff.
Yeah.
I also like. This is sort of with the thematics. I like Skullwoods because you go into the overworld and stuff like that. Like you go out of the dungeon back into it in different parts. I think I'd like to see more of that.
Right. Yeah.
There's a couple ones where you like will go outside and be like on a balcony or something for a second.
Like Dragon Roost isn't one of those.
Yeah, but. Okay. Overall, the overworld doesn't like interacting with the map.
Right.
They should do more like that, I think.
Oh, yeah. That'd be cool.
Yeah. So those were, I guess, some of our favorite dungeons.
Yeah. There's so much more. Like, we didn't even touch on some of the games.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's some of the dungeons in, like, some of the lake dungeons in, like, Oracle of Ages get incredibly complicated. Like, I think one worth mentioning is, like, Mermaids Cave, where you start the dungeon in the past, then you return to the present, and then you go back to the present. You're playing the dungeon in multiple time periods, and what you do in the past affects what appears in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I guess that's kind of elemental in the sense that it's a time elemental dungeon.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a really strong theme, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll probably do some more videos in the future, maybe talking about some more specific dungeons.
Yeah.
We have a Tail Cave video coming up.
A 6-part series.
Let us know though, like what some of your favorite dungeons are. What kind of dungeon you prefer? Like I think a lot of people might not like the linearity, but maybe some people don't mind. Maybe if you have some other concepts of dungeons you'd like us to talk about too, that'd be good. Like to do some more dungeon talk.
Yeah.
Let us know what else you want us to talk about, and thanks for watching.